We have Denae Lawson here, and her presentation is called Connect Through Reading, Empowering Inclusion in Small Literacy Groups. This is our agenda for this presentation. We are going to start with some introductions and bios, then we'll jump into evidence-based strategies for small literacy groups. Then she'll talk about her strategies for small group instruction. Then she'll share about differential instruction in small groups. Next, we'll get into supporting emergent literacy in at-risk populations. And finally, how to address the needs of bilingual and multilingual learners in small groups before we wrap up with references and closing. Denae, thank you so much for coming today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I live in Dallas, Texas, with my husband and our two little toddlers. And this upcoming year will be my 12th year in education. So I taught second grade, third grade, and fifth grade. And after I was done teaching fifth grade, then I became a K through 2 literacy interventionist. And I spent 3 years literally just pulling small groups all day, every single day, to teach tier 3 students how to read and really fill in those foundational skills gaps that they had. And I started that in the year 2020. I started that in 2020. So I became an interventionist right after, the shutdown, the lockdown, the pandemic, when kids were first starting to come back to school. So I've taught pre-COVID and post, I mean, COVID's still going on, but the lockdown and all that stuff. So I know that the kids are a little different now than they were before. And now I'm a K through 2 reading specialist. And so I coach teachers on all things literacy, and I also push into their classrooms to work with small groups of students.
I love that. Thank you for sharing your experience and where you're at now and how that journey has evolved. I will briefly introduce myself because I read the same bio all day. But if someone is just joining for this presentation, my name is Vanita Litvack and I go by she, her. I have a passion for AAC and assistive technology and literacy. And I've co-authored the Lou Knows What to Do book series published by Boys Town Press. And when I am not doing speechy things like this, I enjoy taking tennis lessons, trying new restaurants, and reading books with my 3.5-year-old. And I'll go ahead and share my financial disclosures first. I have ownership interest in Speechy Side Up LLC and Tassel Learning LLC, and I receive royalties from Boys Town Press. I'm also an affiliate for Simple Practice and Meaningful Speech and a member of ASHA. How about you, Denae?
Yeah, I'm a teacher author on Teachers Pay Teachers. And so I make commission from sales in my store, Texas Teacherella. And then I'm also receiving an honorarium for this speaking engagement. And I don't have any non-financial relationships to disclose.
Thank you. Okay, so by the end of this presentation, we hope that you'll be able to identify 2 reading principles that are crucial for fostering literacy, describe 2 ways to provide differential instruction, list 2 ways to support emergent literacy in at-risk populations, and describe 2 ways to address the needs of bilingual and multilingual learners in small groups. And just out of curiosity, anybody that's watching this, can you let us know in the chat if you currently work with small groups and in what capacity? Are you a speech therapist that's pushing into the classroom for small groups or pulling out for small groups? Are you doing tiered reading instruction like Denae described? We would love to know a little bit more about you. So you can go ahead and drop that in the chat. And Denae, can you start with the science of reading strategies and how those apply to small literacy groups?
Yeah, so in Texas, every single Texas teacher that teaches kindergarten through third grade, I believe, and every administrator and anyone in the school building that works with K through 3 students has to take Texas Reading Academies. And so it's a year-long course that every single teacher is required to do, and it is based on the science of reading. So after taking that course, I really realized there were some things that I was already doing, great, wonderful. And then I also had some aha moments. And one of the things that I really didn't know about before the science of reading was word mapping. And word mapping is, if you're not aware, word mapping is taking sound boxes, or you might hear them called Elkonin boxes. And you are taking a word and then you are breaking it down by phoneme or sound, and you're putting a different sound in each box. So here, I can show you an example. Take out my handy dandy whiteboard on my iPad.
I love this.
So let's say,
Thank you for this.
let's say that I'm wanting to encode the word cat, right? So first I would tell the kids to stretch out. First, we're going to stretch out the word cat. So I use finger stretching to stretch out words. Some people use the chopping method if you're into Heggerty. Some people do like the arms. It doesn't matter what motion you use, but I do suggest using a motion to map out, to stretch out words. So the word is cat. I would go ah, cat. How many phonemes did we hear? And they'd say we heard 3 phonemes. Great. So how many boxes do we need? 3 boxes. And usually they have a sheet that has different boxes on it, but for this, I will just do 3 boxes. It's like these are the sound boxes that I'm talking about, or the Elkonin boxes. And then I would write down the letters that match each sound. So if the word is cat, I would say, okay, the first sound I hear is, I know that's a letter C, so I'm going to put a C right here. The next sound I hear is like the first sound in apple. So I'm going to put an A right here. And the last sound I hear is t. So I'm going to put a T in that last box. And then I would tell the kids, okay, now we're going to point to each sound, like we're going to point to each letter, say the sound, and then blend it together to say the word. So we would go at cat, like that. So that's word mapping. That is huge when it comes to teaching literacy in small groups. We do this, so like with our curriculum, we do word mapping whole group, and then we also do it in small groups. And also that goes along with that is heart words. And I don't know if you've heard of heart words. I feel like that's okay, great. So heart words is just a way of teaching like high frequency words. And when I was a teacher, like when I first started teaching in 2013, I was the one that had like all of the high frequency words on flashcards, and like they would go to the bathroom and I'm like, get your flashcards while you wait in line and just, read through all of them and you're just going to memorize them. Good luck. Right? I think a lot of us taught high frequency words that way. And what I loved about science of reading is that it taught me that there are some high frequency words that are completely decodable, and there are some that have decodable parts. And then the other parts that aren't decodable, we have to learn those by heart. We just have to know those by heart. So it kind of helps when you are trying to tell a kid, the word, like if I take the word that, let's say we're going to do the word that. And instead of saying, okay, I haven't taught you TH yet, but the word is that, we're going to spell it, we're going to write it down, we're going to build it, and then you're going to do flashcards on it. So now getting them to understand that we might not know that TH sound yet, but we do know the A makes the A sound and the T makes the T sound. Like we know those things. And so we just have to remember the TH sound by heart right now until I teach that to them. So if I was using, and I use the heart words with the sound boxes as well. So if I have the word that and I stretch it out, it'd be at. So that would be 3 sounds. So I would do my 3 boxes again. But TH is going to share a box because they make one sound. And then I would put A and T there. So it would look like, that THAT. And so since they don't know the TH sound yet, since I haven't taught that yet, then they would just put a heart. I would just put a heart above that sound so they know that that's a heart sound. And so we call those our heart words. And then after a while, after they learn that sound, well, then that's no longer a heart word because you know that TH makes the sound. So heart words are huge, just a way to really understand high frequency words and a way to teach it to kids without just telling them to memorize it, because that's just the way that it is. And then also blending. And I kind of did that when I was reading the words with blending. And I feel like there's been a stress on phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, and just being able to orally blend words before we start encoding, right? And before we start looking at print. And that has been a huge help, especially in small groups, because what I noticed is that before I would just give kid a word and I would say, okay, let's sound it out, let's blend it, let's read it. And they still didn't get it. And I'm like, what is happening here? And then I realized that orally blending, before they even see the words put on paper, even if you don't know your letters, you don't know your sounds, you should be able to blend orally. So I should be able to say at, what word is that? And you should be able to say cat without ever seeing it in print. And so then when kids cannot do that, like that's a huge red flag to me. Like, oh, we need to break it down some more. And I will talk about Wiley Blevins. I don't know if you're familiar with Wiley Blevins at all.
I've heard of is it like, did that person create a technique or something?
Yeah, he is actually one of the curriculum writers for the benchmark education.
Okay.
And he is like I call him the guru of all things phonics.
Okay.
And he is amazing. I've heard him speak. I have like so many of his books. And one thing that he always talks about and I'll keep going back to him throughout this whole presentation because he's amazing. But with blending is making sure that kids can do it orally. And he talks about the progression of skills. And so if like, let's say that I'm doing at and they can't get it, then I would take a step back. So right now I'm doing phoneme by phoneme, but maybe I need to take a step back and do onset and rhyme, right? So maybe I just need to do at. What word does that say? If they still don't get it, then we have to back it up even more. And that's when I go back to like compound words, like butterfly. What word is that? And then we build back up to the phoneme. So that blending part is huge because then I can see exactly where the gaps are in the kids. And if I need to scaffold, if I need to go back in order to build up their competency so they are able to blend phoneme by phoneme. Because if they cannot blend that orally, then they are not going to be able to read it on paper. And if
Mm.
they can, that just tells you that they memorized words. They're not actually reading the words. So that was huge through science of reading. And then segmenting, so blending is our decoding, right? And then segmenting is our encoding. And you would hope with blending orally that eventually they'll be able to decode. And same thing with segmenting. If we can segment orally, then we should be able to encode or to write things down, right? Or to build words. And spelling is huge. And I think that a lot of the times spelling kind of gets a bad rap because it's like no more spelling tests and no more this and no more that, which I agree. You shouldn't give a kid a list of words on Monday, tell them to write it in rainbow words or 3 times each, and then give it to them completely out of context on Friday and just write the words down. That's ridiculous. I 100% agree with that. But I think some people have gone to the far left where they're like, I'm just not going to teach spelling at all. Also not the right way to go. And so segmenting really helps with the spelling. And I can't remember who said this. And so I'm sorry that I don't remember who this was, but I can look it up. I was listening to a podcast and she was talking about spelling. And she said that just because you are a good reader doesn't mean you are a good speller. But if you are a good speller, you are probably a really good reader. And then she said to think about the word narcissist. Like if I saw the word narcissist or if you saw it, you would be able to read it. No problem. Like that's a sight word for us. We know what that word looks like. We know how to say it. Ask me how to spell narcissist. And that's a whole nother thing, right? So I think people forget how important spelling is. Like if you really have kids understand segmenting and encoding, then they will be better readers 100%. So just not skipping that part, not skipping the segmenting, not skipping the encoding, and really focusing on that as well as the decoding, and it really will pay off in the long run. So that's my science of reading spiel.
This is great. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. So
Yeah.
when you were doing the word mapping, it seemed like you were doing the segmenting of cat. Do you recommend doing it simultaneously with blending? Do you recommend doing blending before segmenting?
I think if you're working on, I would do blending before I do segmenting
Okay.
to answer that. And just because we want kids to be readers as like we want to get them to fluency as soon as possible.
Okay.
right? When we're working in these small groups. And so I would focus on blending, and then I would work on segmenting. But they kind of do, I don't know, they kind of do happen simultaneously. And I'll talk about it later when I talk about like the routine
Okay.
of small groups, because I will do blending first and then I will do segmenting all in the same small group. So it's not like we do one day and then one the next day. Like they're happening one right after the other.
Okay. And do you find that like once a child gets how to blend phonemes that it kind of sticks and then they're able to generalize it across different phonemes? Or do you feel like that it's like kind of staggered depending on what the phoneme is that they're blending?
Once they understand how to blend and once they know their letter sounds, they take off reading. It
Okay.
is wild how that happens.
That's great. I mean, so we have Spencer Russell as our keynote for this, and I've taken his toddlers can read course because I have a toddler, and his approach is a little bit different, and it is based on the science of reading as well, but it's essentially, and I'm probably simplifying this, and he can explain better during our panel, but you teach all of the consonants and the vowels, like basically the letter sounds of the alphabet first. And then once they get all of those, then you can start working on blending. However, I've been kind of like doing some blending because we're up to like 22 letter sounds right now in my household. And I just wanted to see, could we like start with the ones that she has? So it's just very like interesting. And I get what you're saying about the whole memorizing piece because I can see that too. Like everything to her is it. Like if I show her two letter words, she's like it. And I'm like, actually, no. So you just memorize that first one that we worked on. I need to go back to like how to actually teach blending. So I'm excited you're going to be talking about that today.
Yeah. And with what you were saying about that, like the letter sounds first, I go back, like that's part of like, I feel like that reading wars thing and like going back and forth, what should we do first, the other one. And I constantly tell my teachers, you have to teach. I personally think you have to teach both. I see the most results when we teach them at the same time. And we use Hegarty in our district. And when we start foundational skills, we start with blending, segmenting without print, just so that they can hear the sounds, because it's really important for them to hear the individual sounds. And then we go into the letters and the sounds. So all on the same day, just split.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely this is such a well-rounded like conference. I love hearing like everybody's perspective and I feel like it's like take what you need
Mhm.
and then, run with that. And so and everybody watching this today can take bits and pieces. At least we know that everything we're hearing is evidence-based and based on like the science of reading. But yeah, the approaches vary in some respects. And I think you have to provide that differential instruction. You know your student or your child best and you know what they can handle. So an approach is a starting point, right? But then how you implement it. When you're doing small literacy groups, I could see where you have to kind of like stay with the routine because everybody, you're working within a group, but you are going to talk about how to do differentiated instruction as well. So I can't wait to hear more
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about those strategies for small group instruction.
Yeah. And before I really get into like the literacy part of it, I do want to say that management and organization of your small groups is huge. And if you are not organized and kids don't understand the routines and procedures that go along with working in small groups, and doesn't matter how great the literacy that I'm about to talk to you about is, they're not going to learn anything. So just making sure that you are set up for success, making sure that when kids come to your small group table, like you don't have a lot of time. So you don't have time for a kid to say, oh, I forgot my pencil. Oh, what materials am I supposed to bring to small group today? I work a lot with first grade. That's really like where I live right now in my school. It's such a crucial year is first grade. And let me tell you, those friends, if they forget a pencil, like they're gone for like 5 minutes. That's like part of your small group time. So I would say having everything there. So like have your highlighters, have your markers, have your dry erase boards, have your magnetic tiles for each student, have your decodable text, have your pencils, have everything at your small group table. They should never have to bring anything if you can help it, so that you can get started right away, because we know that time is, of the essence and there's not a lot of it. So just saying that. And also that like your seating chart, So when you have kids at your small group table, just make sure the ones that need your most attention, your most focus, that might get off task, they are right in front of you. I think when we sit at a horseshoe table, some teachers think like, oh, the person right here by my side, that's the one that needs the most work. And you'll notice this now that I've said it, if when you work with a small group, that you kind of like those friends over there on the side, you are not directly looking at them when you're teaching. You kind of glance over, you like make sure, but really you're looking at the kids that are right in front of you. So the kids that need your most attention should be directly across from you and then fan out from there. So now talking about like the actual routine. Once again, Wiley Levin's amazing. He has this small group routine that I have been using and I love it. It's really a way to make sure you get all components of literacy in a small group. And I'll talk a little bit more later about how I divide the groups up and the times for each one, but I have about 20 minutes for each small group. And I always start with fluency. So fluency is huge, and that might look like, it really depends on the group, but some kids will start off fluency, and this is like 2 minutes, not a long time. So maybe we'll do a fluency task to do with letter sounds, or if they're working on high frequency words, we'll do one with that. Or I might have kids that are working on intonation and prosody, right? So then those friends would be getting phrases to work on fluency. So I would always start with fluency, just 1 or 2 minutes, very quick fluency. And then we move into the blending portion of small groups. So with the blending, that is, what I talked about before. Usually the curriculum comes with word cards for whatever skill that you are teaching. So you've already had your tier 1 lesson whole group, right? And so now you are taking that and you are doing it in your small groups, but it's not the same lesson, right? We're doing it a little different. So I would start with, when I'm blending, I'm explicitly teaching that phonics skill. And then we are blending words that have that phonics skill in it because they need to be able to connect what you did whole group with like words on a page and paper. So we will do blending words together, and then we will move into segmenting. And that is, the encoding piece. So I'm still using the same phonics skill that we've been working on all week. We are just segmenting words with that phonics skill in it. So we are either writing words like on our whiteboards, they're writing down words that I'm dictating to them, or we use cookie sheets for our magnetic letters. They're like $1 at the dollar store. I guess it's $1.25 now. So we use those, and they will build words on there. So whether it's spelled like writing it down or word building, we are working on encoding and that spelling piece. And then the huge chunk of our time in small groups is reading. And I say during that reading time, kids should be reading the entire time. During that, like, let's say you have 10 minutes. I try to do at least 10 minutes for reading, and they should be reading the entire time. So that means that we're not going around and popcorn reading. We are not, you read a sentence, and then you read a sentence, and then you read a sentence. We're not doing that, because when one person's reading a sentence, what are the other kids doing? Like, they're probably not reading. They're probably not paying attention. You're gonna get to them. They're gonna say, "What sentence are we on again?" It's just the way it works. And your time is so valuable in those small groups that you don't have much of it. So they should be reading that whole time that you're doing the reading piece of the small groups. So what I do is I have the kids silently read to themselves. Like, I'll give them a decodable text. So if we're working on the ow sound, then we're gonna have an ow, a bunch of owl words in our decodable text. And I'll tell them to read silently or to read, they can whisper read. I can give them a little whisper phone. And so they are reading. And then I tell them, okay, I'm going to pop in on you while you're reading, and I'm going to listen to you read. And you're just going to read to me wherever you are. You don't have to start all over again, just wherever you are, read it out loud to me. And so I'll do that for 10 minutes. So I usually spend like 1, maybe 2 minutes on each kid, depending on how big the group is, but I usually try to keep it at 1 minute. I'll listen to them read a sentence. I will help them use like sound out words, use strategies that we've learned. And then I might ask them like a comprehension question. before I move on to the next kid. And that whole time I keep my iPad for everything. I use it for all my notes. So I'll write notes on the kids while I'm going around and listening to them read. And that is just a really great way to make sure that they are applying the skills that you have been teaching in class and who might need extra support, right? And so I'll go around with that. And if I don't get to all the kids during that day, then I'll say, okay, I stopped with you today. I'll start with you tomorrow. All right, when we do this reading piece. So you sometimes, because I like to do 1 minute or 2 minutes for each kid, but then you get stuck on one kid and you're just like, whew, it's taking a lot longer than I thought. And that happens, right? Like that's real world. Like that's what happens. And then the last few minutes, I like to do a writing piece, and that's when we respond to the text. And in an ideal world, you can get to all of this stuff in 20 minutes, but sometimes you don't. And like usually the response to writing is like the piece that kind of gets cut off if we run out of time. But even if we don't do it in that session, like in that small group time, like we'll do it the next day, just to make sure that we always have that writing piece in there as well. So that's like kind of the routine that I go through for all of the small groups. And then lastly, just holding students accountable. I remember like my first year teaching, and my principal called me into her office and she was like, Denae, you have the highest reading scores in this school. Like, how did you do it? I'm just looking around and I'm like, I don't know. But I realize now that I never let kids just tell me that they don't know. That was never an acceptable answer when it came to reading. You were going to use the strategies that we've learned in class, and you are going to try to read. And I think a lot of times I see teachers working with kids, and if they like, let's say we're working on our words and the word is down and the kid didn't get it, like they look up at you, they look at the word and they look up at you and they'll say, oh, that word is down. Okay. And the kid will say down and they'll keep reading. That's not holding the student accountable, right? Because we learned that skill. So you should be able to read this word. So if I was working with that kid and they look up at me because they don't know that word, I would say, okay, let's use some of our strategies. All right. Let's sound it out together. So that letter D, what sound does it make? And they're like, D, right. And remember OW, remember we learned that today? And then I usually point to, the board, whatever the visual is for that sound. And I'm like, what sound does OW make? Or I might do like the motion, because like we do OW, ow, right? Whatever you use to get them to remember what that is, I would remind them that, and they would be like, oh, that's ow, right? And then I'm like, yeah, and then what sound does N make? And they're like, and I'm like, okay, so now let's blend it, right? Let's say it really fast. So they would go down, down. Look at you. You just got that word. Awesome. And then we move on to the next word. So that's what I mean by holding kids accountable. Don't just, and even if they didn't remember the ow sound, give them the ow sound. That's fine, but hold them accountable for that D and that N, right? Mm-hmm. Because they know how to read those sounds. So
I love that. And I appreciate the example as well, because I can also see how it's like a time thing, right? Like, oh, we just want to finish this text. And I know it's going to take a while to like sound this word out. So I'll just give this one to you. But what you're essentially doing is you're helping that child process the blending. And it takes time. Anything that you're practicing takes time, but you're showing them that they can be successful, and you're being patient with them as they're learning that process.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I wanted to ask and you might have mentioned this, but like what type of group is this that you're describing? Is this like a tier 2, a tier 3?
This group I'm describing is tier 2.
Okay.
Yeah, like your tier 2 friends that are, and I call them like, I don't know, you might have heard of them like bubble kids, like the ones that are like, they could float up this way or they could float down, or
Okay,
like
never heard that.
You don't know which way they're going to go over the fence. So yeah, the tier 2 ones. Mm-hmm.
And then what does tier 3 look like? Is it a smaller group? Actually, how many kids are in this tier 2 typically?
Tier 2, I mean, it really depends on the class size. And I'm trying to think specifically, like with the groups that I worked with last year, it would be 5 or 6 kids. We don't do more than 6 if we can help it. And then the tier 3 groups are smaller. So try really hard to do that, like 4 kids if we can. But like last year, one of our teachers had 25 kids, and I was just like, okay, well, these groups are a little bigger than we would like, but we work around it and we figure it out.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And I think you shared some really great tips that maybe not a lot of people think of, like the management organization, the seating chart, and the holding kids accountable. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So what does differential instruction look like in small groups? And is this done in tier two or is this done more in tier three?
Tier 2 and tier 3,
Okay.
and even tier 1. And I'll talk about that with the frequency of the groups.
Okay.
But just starting with like what not to do.
Mhm.
So my first year teaching, I learned a lot that year.
I think we all do, right?
Yeah. You ever look back and you think about those kids and you're like, oh my gosh, I hope y'all are okay.
Yes.
So what not to do, like my first year teaching, I was so excited because I was getting observed by my assistant principal and I was been pulling small groups and I was like, this is going to be great. So she comes into my classroom, I do my whole group lesson, we go to small groups, and I think everything goes great. The kids were great. And then afterwards, I was like, okay, so how did I do? And she said, Denae, those are not small groups. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I pulled the kids to my table and we did work. And she's like, you did the exact same thing in every single group. She's like, that's not the point of small groups. Small groups are taking small groups of kids and giving them exactly what they need on their level. If you're going to tell everyone, if you're going to teach everyone the exact same thing in small groups, then do it whole group. There's no point in pulling them in small groups. And that was like a light bulb moment for me, right? So don't do that. Also, don't take your tier 1 instruction and then just redo it in small groups. That's also not best practice either, because you were once again not giving kids exactly what they need. And then also, and this might be a little controversial, but I'm going to say it. So working as an interventionist for years, I was constantly trying to catch kids up. And there was one point where I had to stop and say, when do I expose these children to grade level material? Because if I keep going backwards 2 years to teach you, the foundational skills, then you're never going to be on grade level. You are always going to be behind. You are always going to be playing catch up. So I would say, like, let's say the whole class is learning ow, right? Then in small groups, I'm also going to expose them to ow. Like, we're also going to be reading words that have the ow sound in it. We also might be doing short A words, right? Because that's what they need as well. But I'm not going to just completely get rid of like our on level instruction because you are behind, because then you'll always be behind, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Like you're at least exposing them
Right.
again a little bit more and a little bit more like one-on-one within those small groups.
Yes. And then if we are working on the out sound whole group, but then they need short A because they don't have short A, then I will explicitly teach them short A and we'll work on that as well in small groups. But I'm just also bringing in that out sound as, too.
Yeah.
And then, so the next one is quality over quantity. I always thought that I had to see every single student every single day. And that was a really hard shift for me when I realized that it wasn't about quantity, it was about the quality of instruction that they were getting. So originally I would have 60 minutes to teach small groups. So I would do 4 15-minute small groups and I would see all the kids and they would come over to my table and we'd go boom, 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 like so fast. And then I'd send them on their way. And it was like the kids were like drinking out of like a water hose, right? It's a lot of information really fast. Was it quality? Probably not. Right. But I was getting to all the things and we were moving on to the next group and I felt good because I was seeing every single kid. And I think over time and like listening to going through Texas Reading Academies and the science of reading, it's really about the quality, not necessarily the quantity. And some kids need more than others. And it was kind of like that whole fair versus equitable, right? Seeing every kid every day is fair, right? But it's not equitable because some kids need to see me more than others. And over time, like the minutes shifted in our district. And so I didn't have 60 minutes to teach small groups anymore. Now that our teachers have 45 minutes to teach small groups in K2, or actually that's just first and second. So with that, I have told the teachers they pull 2 20-minute groups 4 days a week. And the way that, and that kind of goes into the frequency of groups. So the kids that, like my tier 3 kids, the kids that are struggling the most, they get seen 3 times a week in small groups. And then usually we have 2 groups usually that are tier 2, and they see the teacher 2 times a week. And then the tier 1, like the above grade level kiddos, they see the teacher 1 time a week. And they have quality things that they are working. We've tried really hard to find quality things for them to work on when they're not at the teacher table. And really the ones that are more independent are the ones that we don't see as much, because I'm not worried about them goofing off or like not knowing what to do because, you know, they can't read the material or anything like that. But that's a whole nother discussion about what the kids do when they're not at your table. And so with that, I tell well, in our school, and a lot of campuses I've worked on, there's usually coaches, like I'm one of those coaches, or they're interventionists. So even though my tier 3 kids might see me or might see the teacher 3 times a week, well, I'm also pushing in 2 times a week. So then they're seeing someone 5 days a week, right? So they're still getting that. It just might not all be from the teacher. So if you have those, if you're lucky enough to have those people on your campus, then use them, have them come in, have them help you. That's what we're here to do. We're here to coach you, and we're here to help you, and we're here to work with your kids and to support in any way possible. So if you have a coach on campus that's not pushing into groups, I would, figure out how you can get that to work in your favor. And then keep it simple. Okay. Keep differentiation simple. And you need to go, like if you've heard, go slow to go fast. I'm a huge advocate of that. You will not be able to, sometimes it's overwhelming to think that you have to differentiate everything at one time. And you don't need to do that. Take a small part of your small group and differentiate that piece. And then it snowballs and then it builds and you can differentiate more. So keep that in mind. Keep it simple. Go slow to go fast. You don't have to do everything at one time. You can go slow. And then the last part is district curriculum. So we all have curriculum from the district that we can use. And I tell the teachers, like, let's start with the district curriculum first, and let's differentiate from there before we go off and we try to find things in a bunch of different places, right? So with our district curriculum, it's usually meant for on grade level students. So what I tell the teachers is, use that for your higher, tier 2 kids, that's fine. And then for the lower tier 2 kids and your tier 3 kids, we're going to be adding scaffolds. And then for your kids that are above grade level, okay, so now we are doing extension. We are doing challenging things based on that baseline district curriculum. So an example of that would be, let's say you want to differentiate the fluency piece of your small groups. So if you want to differentiate that piece, then your district curriculum probably is going to give you high frequency words, and that is their baseline fluency piece, is high frequency words. So I'm going to do a high frequency word task with my tier 2 group. Well, then my tier 3 group, we are not reading those high frequency words. We don't know our letter sounds. So then our fluency task is letter sounds. And we are doing something that has to do with letter sounds to get them better with that. And then for my friends that are above level, they already got high frequency words. They knew those before they even got in here. So we are working on fluency phrases, and we are working on prosody. We have phrases that have like question marks and exclamation points and periods. And that's what we're doing for our fluency task. And I actually have that in my Teachers Pay Teacher store, one for high frequency words and one for phrases. And I will give that to the kids. We'll do that together, but especially the ones that are above level, they can do it on their own, and they do it with a partner and they race, and it's really fun to see them really get into it. So that's great. That's just like an easy way. Like that's nothing super extra that you have to put into it. You just differentiated fluency right there, right? Or let's take blending, for example. Let's say that you want to differentiate the blending piece. Well, the district curriculum is probably going to give you, if we're doing owl, again, they're going to give you owl words. So I'm sure they probably even have word cards in your curriculum that have down or cow or shout, whatever it is that's on there. And I would use those. Like, let's just use that for a task for our on-level kids. Then we're going to add scaffolds for the kids that are below grade level, right? So instead of, like, I still want to expose them, like I said, to that on grade level curriculum. I'm not just going to forget about it with them, but instead of seeing it on paper and showing it to them and we're blending it together, I'm going to do it orally, right? So it's the same word card that I already have. I'm not having to find extra materials, and I am going to blend it orally, or I'm going to segment it orally for them, and they're going to blend it together and tell me what the word is. And then I would turn the card around and I would show them what it looks like in print, but I'm not expecting them to read the words off of the paper, right? So that's just a way to differentiate it for them. And then for my friends that are above grade level, I would take those same words and then I can turn them into more complex words. So they can be multisyllabic words, they can be compound words. And like in our curriculum, they provide those words for us. So like I might put campground or, you know, something that is more like on a higher level for them. Or I might put it in like they're reading sentences with these words, these multisyllabic words in them. So that's what I mean by keeping it simple. Right? Start there. It doesn't have to be this huge thing. And I think the teachers at my school get overwhelmed. They're like, I have to differentiate for all of these small groups, and I have to plan for my tier 1 instruction, and now I have to plan for my small groups. And it doesn't have to be this huge elaborate thing. It could be something so simple using the curriculum that you already have, right? So that's just the simple, like a couple examples of ways that you could differentiate in your small groups.
Those are great. And I love how you broke it down by each different group. So thank you for that. So, how can we better support emergent literacy in at-risk populations?
Yeah, so the first thing I say is check your bias, because we all have that. And I actually worked, so when I first started working, I was in a school, and I'm just going to go in terms of SES. So I was in a school with 96% of the students were identified as low income, and there were 26 different languages spoken on our campus. And then, so I was there for 2 years, and then we moved to Austin. So I didn't work in Austin ISD, another district surrounding Austin. And the kids that were there, 3% of the kids were on free and reduced lunch. So it was a huge shift for me to go from one school to another. And then after that, I went to a school that had about 60% of students were on free and reduced lunch. And then the one after that was about, I would want to say like in the 50s. And that school was interesting because you would have some kids that were living, like multi-families living in one apartment, right? Sitting right next to a kid that was living in a $2 million house down the street. So that was an interesting dynamic to see, you know, everybody. It was really a good mixture of kids, which I loved seeing. And then where I work right now, it's about 75% of the students are on free and reduced lunch. So I have worked in, all that to say that I've just worked in a lot of different populations. And I will say that all kids can learn no matter where they are from. Any strategy that I used in one school, I took the same strategy to the next school. I didn't really change a whole lot. And I think that some people think that kids that are at risk, there's like a bit of deficit thinking with some teachers saying, you know, like even when I was at schools that had high poverty, we had low numbers of kids that would get referred for gifted and talented, right? Because it looks different. And all kids have assets that they bring to the classroom. And it's just really figuring out how you can use that to work in your favor and in their favor. And just like when I was I'll give you an example. When I was at the school, like the affluent school that I was at, I had one kid in my second grade class, and I couldn't figure her out. I was like, I don't know what's going on here. So I went to her first grade teacher and I said, hey, can you tell me about this friend? Are there any strategies that you used that really worked? And she was like, well, you know, she's just low. Like she came in like in the middle of the year, and she's one of those apartment kids. And I was like, what am I hearing right now? Like, I don't even know what that means. Right. But that was the thinking of a lot of teachers on that campus. And I mean, and that's what really took me to wanting to research about that. And that's what my whole dissertation is on. because I do think that it's the deficit thinking in teachers, thinking that these kids are from here, so they cannot learn this. And I think we have to realize that we do have those biases, and we have to just check them and change our thinking, change our mindset, right? Because I've worked with all kids, and all kids can learn, like 100%. It's just not fair to write a kid off because of their background or their living situation. So that was number one, check your bias. And then I'm sure everybody's heard this a million times, relationships over everything, right? So building, especially in at-risk populations, it's harder. Like when I was working there, it was harder to get kids to trust me. And it was really all about building that relationship from the ground up. I had one principal that told me that the first contact you have with a parent shouldn't be negative. And I always, use that till this day. So I spend the first 2 weeks of school calling parents after school, and it would be like a couple parents a day. And if they didn't answer, I would leave a message and I would tell them how much I loved having their kid in my class, right? So that when I did have to call later for something, they didn't think that I was picking on their kid. They were like, she really cares. She wants to work together. And that's the thing that I do with families too, is like, we're a team. I can't do my job without you. And we are going to work together. So I'm always the first one to pick up a phone, to talk to a parent, especially if you notice that something's off with a student, calling the parent right away and say, hey, is everything okay? I noticed that so-and-so, this, that, or the other. Those connections are huge. I mean, everywhere you go, those connections are huge, but really at teaching at-risk populations. And also just with the students, I even had like a lunch bunch with my kids at the beginning of the year. So I would choose 2 or 3 kids to come eat lunch with me every day. And we would just chit chat and talk about their lives and just kind of figure them out a little bit more. When I taught in 5th grade, I asked the 5th graders, I told them I was going to do that. So I had 75 kids because I only taught reading. So I picked like 2 from each class, and we would all sit down and have lunch and chat. And the first group that got there, they like looked around and they looked at me and I was like, are you okay? And they were like, are we in trouble? I'm like, no, I'm doing this to I just want to chat and, and talk about your day and about your lives. And they just looked at me because no one had ever done that before.
I mean, I haven't heard of it. I think it's a great idea, but that's
Yeah.
that would be their first go-to, because I could see why.
Right. I'm in trouble. No, you're not not. So those things are important, and just little things like that to build relationships with the students, because if they don't trust you, they're not going to learn from you. If they don't like you, they're not going to learn from you. Right. So that, and then more into the literacy side now. Background knowledge and vocabulary, building those things is huge, because a lot of times students that live in at-risk that are part of at-risk populations, they do not have a lot of background knowledge for things, especially in schools, like the type of academic language or the vocabulary, like the type of academic language we have, but even the content. For example, I remember I was talking about, we had a story on the beach, about the beach, and some kids did not know what a beach was, right? And it's funny because I was at that school, they don't know what a beach is. And then I was at the affluent school and they're like, we're going to be gone for a week because we're going to Switzerland. Well, that's great. Those friends did not need as much background knowledge, right, as the other, because they have a lot of experiences and life things like that. And I'm not saying that kids that are at-risk populations don't have life experiences, because they do. They're just different. And I do believe that the ones that are showcased and highlighted in schools come from that affluent background and not necessarily the at-risk background, right? I had this one kid that was talking about, I was teaching him that E makes the eh sound. I was like, eh, like the edge of a table. So we're going to touch the edge of the table and we're going to say eh. And he's like, yeah, eh, like edge, like the edge on my head. And I'm like, there's no edge on your head. It's round. And he's like, no, this right here. And I'm like, oh, edges. And I was like, yes, that is right. But if it wasn't me and it was another teacher, they would have totally written him off and call them crazy, right? So just things that are really like academic things that are valued in school aren't necessarily the same values for students that are at-risk populations, but they still have knowledge and assets that should be highlighted in the classroom that can help them with their learning. And so anyway, I got off track there a little bit. But let's say back to the beach one. So if we're reading about beaches and they don't understand beaches, then I need to build that background knowledge. And at the school that I'm at right now, even in kindergarten, when we get to that standard about using background knowledge to make an inference, we're really just focusing on building background knowledge. So like that's what we're doing this whole year. And kinder is just building background knowledge so that they can access those academic texts. And so like if somebody didn't know about the beach, I love tech sets. So tech sets are like different genres of books, but they're surrounding the same topic. So like if it was beaches, then we might read a poem about beaches. We might read a fiction book about beaches. We'll read a nonfiction book about beaches. We'll watch a video about beaches, you know, just really building that up before we even get to the grade level text that we're given to teach. And so building background knowledge is huge. And then also vocabulary. And I feel like that's why a lot of kids that are in at-risk populations don't get referred as much for gifted and talented, because they don't have that academic vocabulary that someone in a more come from a fluent background might, because maybe they have more books or, you know, things of that nature. So really building that vocabulary in them. And that kind of goes into the last piece, which is like exposure to literacy. Because if, depending on where you are, because at-risk populations, I mean, it's a huge spectrum, right? But you might have kids that don't have any books at home. So then what are you doing at school to make sure that they are constantly being exposed to literature? And I am a huge advocate of sending books home. I tell them to bring it back. We'll sign a contract for the parents to bring them back. But if they don't bring them back, like, I really don't care. If you want to keep that book, you keep that book, right? So I try to find ways where I can get books that it's not a big deal if they take it home and it never comes back, right? But my kids they've always been really good at bringing books back to the school. But if it happens, it happens. It's not a huge deal. So making sure that they have that, and they have library books that they can take home as well, but just we'll have library books, and then we'll have like a little book bag. You can do a lot of things too, like donors choose, different grants out there that you can write to get books into their hands and to take it home. And I talk with parents at the beginning of the year about reading with their child every night. And I tell them, like, I know you're busy. I get it. Like, life is crazy. You don't necessarily have to sit down with your kid and read with them. You could be making dinner and they're sitting at the table and they are reading out loud to you, because then someone is holding them accountable. They can't just pretend that they're reading to themselves, like they're reading it out loud and they're reading it to you. So you can still do what you need to do. You can still cook, you can still get lunches ready, but they are reading out loud to you. So I tell parents that, and I also tell them that I'm like, kids love watching TV, right? So how can we use that in our favor? So I'll tell the parents to turn on captions on their, like, the subtitles on the TV show. I was like, have you ever tried looking at a movie or a TV show when you have subtitles and you try not to read the subtitles? You can't. You like keep looking down at the subtitles the whole time. So that is a great way they want to watch TV. That's fine, but you're going to watch them with subtitles, right? So just little things like that, just to make sure that they're constantly being exposed to literacy.
Great points. Love all of those suggestions. Anything else you want to add here before we go to the next one?
Yeah, I don't think so.
So, kind of an extension of that, how do you then address the needs of bilingual and multilingual learners in small groups?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my minor is in Spanish. And so I did study abroad. Yeah, I did study abroad for 4 months. And I was like an emerging bilingual, you know, in a different country. And just so I kind of know what it's like to be thrown into a brand new country. You don't know the language, like you don't know what's going on, and it's hard. English is hard. And I think a lot of people forget how hard English is, because they're like, well, I've grown up with it. It's easy. It's not easy. Like Spanish, I'm using Spanish because my minor's in Spanish, but I work at a bilingual school right now. And with Spanish, like it is a phonetic language. Like, you know, the letters are going to always make the sounds that they're supposed to make. But in English, they don't always make those sounds. And I had one group of kids, a small group of kids, and they were mostly emerging bilinguals. And we were reading a word in here. I'll show you so that you can see. At least this. Okay. So I wrote this word down. We're reading this word, right? And the word is were. And they read it as where. And I said, no, that word is actually were. This is how you spell where. So, I spell where. And they were like, oh, okay, like when you wear clothes. And I'm like, well, actually, this is like the where something is. When you wear clothes, it is spelled like this. That's the kind of clothes you wear. And that's like where something is, like the location. They're like, oh, where? Like the word air. And I'm like, actually, air is spelled AIR. Like,
I
this
mean,
is
let's
a real
just throw
conversation
the
of,
iPad out at that point. Like, you're like, how do I even approach
right? Like,
like, who
but
made up
that
this
is wild.
language?
Yeah. And it's just wild that it's like these all spell air.
Mm.
And I am teaching that to kids, and we're confused as to why they don't understand. It's confused. Like, English is a hard language. It really is. And I work really hard on getting kids to break the code, right? And once they understand the code, then they can start reading more things. But I get really annoyed when teachers tell me that, well, they don't know anything. They don't know this language. They don't know anything. I'm like, actually, they do know a lot. Or I even had a teacher who put all of the emerging bilingual students at one table group. Who is that helping? That is not helping them at all. They are not socializing with other kids. Like, they're not going to learn as much, right? So just recognizing that English is hard. And just because they don't know English doesn't mean that they don't know anything. So that's that whole bias. That's the whole changing our mindset and realizing they do come in with assets as well. And then using Spanish as an example, again, like E and I is really hard for Spanish speakers. And it's because like the letter I in Spanish makes the E sound. So that's super confusing when you're trying to tell them that E makes a sound and I makes the I sound, but they're like, but in Spanish. And so just giving grace really to your bilingual and your multilingual learners always, because it's really hard, especially with E and I, you have Spanish speakers, because that's very, very hard. Anyway, so that's my thing on English being hard. So what I do with bilingual and multilingual learners is front loading materials or accelerating them. So that means that, let's say that on going back to phonics, let's say on this week coming up, we are doing the ow sound, right? So then the Friday before, I would pull a small group at some time during that day, like maybe for 5 or 10 minutes, and I would tell them the skill that we're learning for the next week. I would show them some words, we would do some blending, we would do some segmenting, we would do exposure, so that when they get, like when we start teaching it on Monday, it's not the first time that they're seeing it, right? So they feel more confident in it, they're more likely to participate and to be engaged in what I'm saying. So that's what I mean by front loading, accelerating. And also with visuals. So, like with emerging bilingual students, visuals are huge. I had one student that didn't know, like we were just blending the word lid, and like she didn't know what a lid was, right? So just always having, so like whenever I'm in a small group, I try really hard to have picture cards if I can with whatever we're blending or segmenting. So if I was doing lid and we are blending that together, then I would have lid and then I would have a picture of a lid, right? Just to make sure we're always having those visuals. And same thing with vocabulary. So just making sure that kids are understanding what they're reading. And vocabulary is harder because I feel like it's already hard for kids that are native English speakers. It's vocabulary. So it's especially hard for students who are learning, English for the first time. And that can go along with your front loading and accelerating. that week before is just finding a little piece of time. I feel like teachers on Fridays, especially, you always have like a little catch up time for kids to catch up on work. Like maybe you pull like a little small group for 10 minutes and you front load or accelerate for the following week, right? So, and then making sure that vocabulary always has visuals as well, and building vocabulary into decodable text. And that's something that Wiley Blevins actually talks about is taking these really simple decodable texts and then finding vocabulary words that aren't necessarily in the text, but they can describe what's happening in the text. So you're using the simple text, but you are actually building their vocabulary. So like for an example, there was a decodable text about the farm, and it was like chickens and they were pecking. And the vocabulary word for that book, we decided, because it wasn't in the book, we're like, it's going to be diet. That's going to be the word. So I tell them what the word diet means. And then, or actually maybe diet's not a good example, but like or habitat, or, whatever word's not in there that goes along with the decodable text. And then I tell them the definition of it. I use it in a sentence. And I said, okay, so now you're going to read and we are going to find what is the chicken's habitat. Right? So just building vocabulary into very simple things, and also not assuming that kids understand what you were saying when you use certain words, and just constantly clarifying and checking for understanding.
Those sound like really great tips, and I imagine the visuals, having those visuals is extremely helpful. So thank you for sharing all of those. Is there anything else you want to add here?
I think so.
No? Okay. So it looks like you shared some references here and resources. Do you want to talk about these a little bit?
Yeah, so the first one is my dissertation. And if you feel like reading my dissertation, it's there. But my whole dissertation was on the relationship between socioeconomic status and academic achievement in affluent schools. Because there's a lot of research out there on students who are identified as, at risk or low SES, but not really in the small pockets of them that are in affluent schools. And so that is where a lot of my knowledge comes from, all of that research. And then Wiley Blevins that I've been talking about. So the choosing and using decodable text is the great thing about that book is it's things that like you can just flip to a chapter of what you want and you can take it and use it right away in your classroom. It's not very dense. It is very practical, very useful. And then a fresh look at phonics is it's less things that you can just take and put into your classroom. It's more if you want to understand more into the science of reading behind phonics. And then that progression of skills that I talked about, that's also in that book as well. So those are great references there. Really anything Wiley Blevins, I will say it's wonderful. Right now I'm reading one by him that's called Differentiating Phonics Instruction in Small Groups. So that will be great once I'm done with that, I'm sure. And then my resources there, it's just a link to the reading fluency words and phrases practice that I talked about. That's in my Teachers Pay Teachers store. So if that's something that you want, it's there. I also have on that same, like on the store, I also have like a free sample version of that as well.
Amazing. Denae, this has been so incredible. I feel like you explained like the process of how you do the small groups and how you differentiate them so well. And I loved all of the examples. I know this is going to be super helpful. Any questions that people had during this presentation, we're going to collect them and then we'll present them during the panel discussion. But thank you so much. So where can everybody find and connect with you?
Yeah, so I am most active on Instagram. So Texas Teacherella is my Instagram there. Then I have the website and okay, don't judge the website, guys. I was real strong and then you can tell when I had the first baby. And then dropped off and then I picked up again and then you can tell where I had the second baby. So the website's always a work in progress, but you can always DM me on Instagram or you can send me an email at texasteacherella@gmail.com.
Awesome. And here's our contact information for Tassel. Thank you so much again, Denae. This has been fantastic.
Thank you. It was great chatting with y'all.